Hi, I'm Ken Crystal, Associate Professor of Law at the Widener University School of Law, and welcome to Part 3 of my three-part series on podcasting in law school. In Part 1, I talked about what podcasting is and how podcasting can help students in law school learn difficult concepts by being able to listen repeatedly to short audio recordings that are made by the professor so that the students hear exactly what the professor wants to hear. In Part 2, I talked about the technologies that might be available to do it, as well as the strategy that you would want to use in order to be able to create a series of podcasts for your students. In this Part 3, I want to walk you through actually making a podcast to show you how easy it really is. In Part 2, we talked about selecting a technology that is easy and familiar to you. Now let me talk about the technology that I use. I use a simple handheld digital recorder. This is the Olympus WS600 model. It costs about $80 if you go to Staples or Office Depot or look at Amazon. So about $80. And it has some great advantages to it. First, its biggest advantage is that it has a slide-out USB connection. So I just have to slide out the connection, and I'm able to plug this directly into a USB port on my computer. So I don't have to worry about having a cable or anything else like that. It's all built in. The other advantage of this recorder is that it records in the MP3 format. You recall from Part 2 of the videos that I recommend MP3s because it is the most universally accepted form of audio file, and so it makes it easiest for students to be able to listen to. This Olympus also records in what is known as the WMA format. That's the Windows Media Audio File format, which plays great on the Windows Media Player, but Apple computer users and iTunes or iPod type users sometimes report problems with the WMA formats. That's why I recommend MP3. And this recorder does it. Records them in stereo. So, $80, built-in USB connection, records an MP3. Great recorder. I've used it to make many of the podcasts that I use in my property class. Another recorder that I've used to make some podcasts is a Sony model. This particular Sony model goes for about $60, so it's $20 less than the Olympus. It too records in MP3 format. As a matter of fact, one of its great advantages is that it allows you to select different levels of quality of the audio for purposes of your MP3. Now, generally, these recorders measure that quality by a measurement known as kilobytes per second, KBS. So you will see that the Olympus, for example, records at 196 kilobytes per second or 128 kilobytes per second. So it's gathering more information at 196 than it is at 128. I have found, when using the Olympus at the 128 setting, that my file size of the MP3 file that's generated is about 1 megabyte in size for every minute of recording that I make. So if I make a 15-minute recording, I've got a 15 megabyte file, and that's right at the limit for what Twen will accept before it starts counting how big your files are. So that's an issue. The great advantage with the Sony is that you can select down to as low as 8 kilobytes per second, so a very small file size. Now, again, because it's taking in less information, the quality is going to be less. And frankly, I wouldn't record on this at 8, but I would use the 48 kilobyte per second setting because that gives pretty good quality. Remember, this is just dictation into a machine in a relatively quiet place, so it doesn't have to be concert hall sound. 48 does great, and I end up with a file that's about a third of the size of the file that's generated when recording at 128 kilobytes per second. So, ability to select and therefore control file size, great advantage to the Sony. What are the disadvantages? Well, number one, it doesn't have the slide-out USB connection. Instead, I have to have a cable. And one part of the cable plugs into the recorder. The other part plugs into the USB port on the computer. And so I've always got to make sure that I've got my cable with me if I want to use my Sony. So that's one disadvantage. The other disadvantage is that the Sony records in mono. I told you before that the Olympus records in stereo, and for dictation, mono's fine. It sounds fine coming through the computer speakers. But what you might find is that students listening on headphones might find it odd that they're only hearing you through one ear. So, I don't necessarily think it's a disqualifier, but it's simply something to think about because students might notice it, considering that most everything else is recorded in stereo. All right, so that's the technology. Let me show you how easy it is to make a simple recording. And we'll do that by recording on my Olympus. How do I record? I'm going to press the record button, and it automatically starts recording. If I want to pause, I press the record button again. Pausing, or the ability to pause, is really good if you're looking at papers or you want to pause and think through how you're going to say something in your podcast. It's great. And when you're done, you press the record button and you keep on going. And when you stop, or when you're done or you're ready to stop recording, you hit the stop button. It's that easy. Now, some recorders come with voice-activated recording. So when it doesn't hear the sound that your voice is providing to it, it shuts down. And when it hears the sound of your voice, it starts up. I know that in the past, I've found that technology tended to have a delay at the end of the recording because it's waiting to see, is there going to be more voice? No? Okay, I'll stop. And then when it hears voice, it's got to kind of get itself back into gear. Now, I think in the digital world, that's probably a lot less troubling than what it used to be with the old recorders that were recording onto magnetic tape, because there literally was a mechanical process that had to engage in order to continue recording. So that might be another way to pause, but I find pressing the record button to pause to be much easier. All right, let's make a simple recording. This is Professor Crystal, and this is the test podcast recording for our Part 3 video on podcasting in law school. That's it. Now, do we make a good recording? Well, we press the play button and we can listen.
This is Professor Crystal, and this is the test podcast recording for our Part 3 video on podcasting in law school.
That easy. That's all you need to do to be able to make a recording. Be able to press the record button, be able to press the stop button. All right, well, we've made our recording. Let's transfer our recording into the computer, and then we can work with it from there. In order to be able to get the file from the recorder into the computer, we're going to first take the recorder and connect it to the computer via a USB port. When that happens, Windows Explorer automatically recognizes the recorder as a separate drive on the computer. Here we see it as WS600S, drive K. If I click on that, we can see then that the contents of the recorder include both the manual as well as the actual recordings themselves. when we look at the actual recordings, we can see that they are organized in folders A through E. That's the way Olympus organizes its files on its recorders. It defaults to folder A, but you can select which folder you want to record it in. I recorded during the videotaping in folder E, so let's look there. In folder E, you see that there are 4 different files. 3 of them are in the MP3 format sound. That's that MP3 type file that I talked about. If you look at a full file name for these, you would see that they end in .mp3. In contrast, the 4th file here is a Windows Media Audio file. That's the WMA file format, and a full file name here would show it as .wma. That's how you can distinguish between WMA and MP3 files. And in Windows Explorer, it spells that out for you in the type of file. Alright, this file is the file that I recorded during the video. And I want to get that from the recorder into the computer. So I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to choose to copy that file. Now I want to pick some place on my computer to store it. I'm going to put it into my Documents library, and I'm going to select to paste it. Now you can see that the file is in my Documents library on the computer and available for further use in order to prepare it for distribution. Now that we've got the file in the computer, we can prepare it for distribution. You remember in part 2 we talked about how you can distribute it by burning it onto a CD or putting it on a thumb drive, a physical distribution of the file. Or you could post it to a website like Twen. We're not going to walk through burning it to a CD simply because there are so many different programs out there. Things like Nero, CD Creator, and many other programs that to walk you through one may not help you if your computer has a different program. But all those programs basically involve selecting files and saying burn onto the CD, and as long as you've got a CD drive that allows you to burn CDs, it's that simple. For a thumb drive, though, the process is relatively universal. And so let's go through putting it onto a thumb drive. In order to be able to copy from the computer onto a thumb drive, I first need to insert the thumb drive into a USB port. Here, Windows Explorer has recognized that thumb drive as a removable disk. If I look at that, we see that the thumb drive is empty. It has no files on it. To copy from the computer to the thumb drive, I'm going to go back to my Documents library where my file was located, select that file, and choose to copy it. Then I'm going to select the thumb drive, the removable disk, and paste that file into place. Now I have copied the file from the computer onto the thumb drive, and I can now physically distribute that thumb drive to my students so that they can hear the podcast. The other way to distribute is to post the file up to Twen. That's how I do it. I take my podcast recordings and post it onto my Twen page for my property class. So let me show you how easy it is to do that. To be able to post the podcast up to a website like Twen, I'm going to need to upload the file to the website itself. Let me walk you through how I do that with my Twen page. Here we see my Twen page and the various classes that I have on it. I'm going to post our test podcast to my Property 1 Twen page. When I select that, you can see that I have a specific folder called Podcasts. If I click on that, Twen shows all the different podcasts that I have available to my property students. To add the file, I am simply going to click on the Add an Item, since I'm just adding one, and Twen is going to prompt me to give that a document name. It's going to ask me to browse to find that file that I want to upload, and I'm going back to my documents library and selecting Open. I tend to uncheck the boxes for translating to HTML and marking citations, because with podcasts, those are things that just aren't going to be needed. Now I've given the podcast a name, I've got the file, and you can see the .mp3 at the end of the file name, and now I'm going to select Submit. If I go down to the bottom of the list of all my podcasts, there's our test podcast file located on the page. I think it's helpful to students to have a separate page with the podcasts so they know exactly where to go to get the podcasts for my class. That's it. We've made a recording, we've got it into the computer, and now we've prepared it either for physical distribution via a thumb drive or have distributed it onto the web page on Twen. And now students can access the file and be able to listen to it. I hope this 3-part series has helped you to see how easy it is to provide what I believe is a very helpful tool for our law students. Easy to record, easy to post up, easy to do. Now, it may be scary at first. It was the first time I tried it. But if you follow the advice of having familiarity with the technology, having a strategy for what you want to say and how you want to do it, you can help to create an additional way for your students to learn the law. Thanks, and good luck.